Hello, my name is Ishaan.
Hello, my name is Pallavi.
And welcome to Politics
Corner.
Your crash course in modern day politics on the international, national, and local stages.
Here we pride ourselves on a moderate and unbiased approach to politics, regardless of our political affiliations, and we hope to encourage our fellow Californians to learn and care about the government.
Today we have quite the agenda. We are going to go over COP26 Glasgow, Build Back Better, and critical race theory right after this.
Welcome back, folks, and welcome to the first segment of Politics Corner, international news, where we're going to talk about the COP26 Glasgow.
So COP26 refers to the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, which took place between October 31st and November 12th this year in Glasgow, Scotland.
And a lot of high-profile individuals from the United States were at the conference, including our president, Joe Biden, and a few congressional delegates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or AOC as she's popularly known. There's been a couple of scandals that arose from the conference. For example, Joe Biden gave a speech about waking up to the immediate dangers of climate change before ironically falling asleep at the conference.
Yeah, that was true. That was a pretty big one. So after he gave his speech, he was sitting down and listening to another speaker when cameras captured him dozing off and then being woken up by a White House aide to clap. I wish we could show the actual clip, but this is a podcast.
Biden supporters, including several left-leaning Democrat media outlets, have pointed out that he was overworked and jet-lagged. What do you think?
I mean, I certainly understand why he dozed off, and I'm sympathetic, but also I understand some of the outrage. Despite the hectic schedule and whatnot, you're still the face of the United States, and your every move is going to be scrutinized as a representation of our country on a diplomatic level. So it's sort of an international embarrassment with or without the justification.
Yeah, I can definitely see both sides to that. But on a lighter note, I really did laugh when I first saw this. Donald Trump's hashtag Sleepy Joe was revived because of this, which is probably not great for optics, but hilarious.
Yeah, but Joe Biden was not the only scandal to unfold at COP26. Greta Thunberg was also in attendance, and where does she go without inciting rage from one person or another?
Greta Thunberg is an 18-year-old Swedish climate change activist who a lot of conservatives have mocked as a climate alarmist.
So what do you think about that? Do you think that she is climate alarmist? Is climate change real? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think climate change is real. I also think that a lot of the policies that are in place today are nothing but just, done for optics. They're not really going to have a big change.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think too much of our politics right now is surrounded around optics. And I think, at least in part, that's due to the hyperpolarization of the nation right now. But you know what? We'll get to that in a second. So Greta Thunberg basically trashed COP26 as nothing but a publicity event, which we'll get to. But the point I want to make here is that she now has both the left and the right coming after her, which is not great for her because this is not her first PR scandal this year. Now, is it?
No, indeed. Earlier this year, Greta Thunberg posted a social media toolkit to Twitter to support farmers protesting in India, which India sort of unilaterally took great offense to.
The latest tweet came hours after a monumental self-goal. The toolkit, tweeted by Greta on Wednesday, turned out to be a document on the 26 January violent protests that gave a detailed blueprint of mobilizing against the government of India. It called for an on-ground protest at Indian embassies and government offices and a tweet storm by tagging handles of the Prime Minister's office and the Agriculture Minister. The manual also said that it was paramount to put international pressure on the Indian government.
So most investigators agreed that she was in cahoots with an Indian separatist movement. And this whole incident actually gave rise to hashtag cancel Greta Thunberg, which was shockingly supported by the left.
Greta Thunberg's public approval is waning, and that is due at least in part to her age. Her popularity was based on, oh wow, this is a 10-year-old and she's so involved in activism. But now she's just this far-left radicalized adult who doesn't want to pursue any actual policy and is just making enemies everywhere she sets foot.
She does make one good point, though, and that is, what did COP26 actually achieve? And In short, COP26 was a disappointment to anyone who hoped that we would be meaningfully combating climate change as a result of the conference. I suppose one big thing was Brazil agreed to cut deforestation by 2030, which is great because of the illegal deforestation of the Amazon. But other than that, what? China and the U.S. agreed to, and I quote, work together to reduce emissions by an undetermined amount, which essentially means they will probably be doing nothing, right? Australia and China did not opt into agreements for cutting coal or methane emissions. Big surprise, they're agricultural nations. India delayed their net zero goal to 2070 to allow 20 years for oil-based economic development. We launched a $10.5 billion fund for helping nations transition to renewable energy. What happened?
The UN also loves throwing around all the assemblies that were created as a result of the conference. I mean, okay, well, let's just count, right? United States Climate Corps, COP Health Program, Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council, the International Aviation Climate Ambition Coalition. What are these assemblies going to achieve? There is a possibility that they're going to be super effective and actually generate change, but then more than likely the possibility is that very many of them were just created for the purpose of optics, and once they fade out of the public view, they will essentially dissipate.
I mean, nations, especially developing ones, are hesitant to cut back on their emissions because their goals aren't necessarily aligned on a world stage. These nations are looking to have economic booms, and oil, like it or not, is a great producer of those. But I like what you said there about uncertainty. Uncertainty is echoed by the promises that these nations made. We really don't know what effects those agreements are going to have on national policy. We don't know how that's going to affect us day to day, tax policies, corporations. We don't know any of this. So I really wouldn't consider COP26 to be the end of climate change. This is the beginning of the battle for anybody for or against cutting climate change. And I think more than likely we're going to be revisiting this topic sometime soon.
Yep, I agree. Well, that is all we have on COP26 Glasgow, and we'll be right back after this to talk about the Build Back Better. See y'all soon.
Welcome back, folks, and welcome to the second segment of Politics Corner National News, where today we are going to talk about Build Back Better.
Yeah, that's a tongue twister. So now, if you don't live under a rock, though, you've most likely heard about Build Back Better, but don't quite understand what it is. So let's go ahead and break that down.
Yeah, so to understand Build Back Better, you have to understand that the reason this drama is even possible is because of several unique circumstances that are just perfectly converging to cause what is in essence political mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the folks are probably familiar with the debt ceiling. So the US runs a significant budget deficit, which we make up for by borrowing money from individuals like other nations, etc. And the debt ceiling is set by the Congress as a limit to how much the US can borrow.
Now, even though that sounds like a good idea, it actually opens the door to situations like this. The reality is, America has never defaulted on her loans. So most of the world doesn't really care that we are constantly running into debt. But a debt ceiling actually poses a pretty significant threat where if Congress can't work together to raise the ceiling in time, we could go into government shutdown since we're not allowed to spend any money. We could default on our loans for the first time, which would be economically disastrous for pretty much the entire world. Or we could pull interesting shenanigans like minting $1 trillion coin, which, by the way, has actually been considered in the past.
Right, but basically, whenever we approach the debt ceiling, the Congress has to approve a new budget bill, which raises it. Or bad things will happen, and that reflects poorly on the president. And they can use that to their advantage by negotiating with the president for things that they want in exchange for raising the debt ceiling.
I think there's a good time to bring up that the second unique circumstance is that we are perfectly divided in Congress, both the House and the Senate.
Right. I mean, what that means is, as you know, we have exactly 50% Democrats and 50% Republicans in both divisions of Congress, which wouldn't be an issue for Democrats because the vice president right now, Kamala Harris, breaks any congressional ties, and obviously she will vote in support of her party. But the Senate doesn't require 50% in order to pass a bill. They require a supermajority, which is two-thirds of the members.
There is a caveat to that two-thirds rule, though, and that is a process called congressional reconciliation, where the Senate decides to negotiate on a bill and that they only need a 50% majority to pass it. However, reconciliation can only be done once a year, and it can only be used for budget bills. And we are using reconciliation right now to pass Build Back Better.
So again, coming back to that same question. So what is Build Back Better? On top of a debt ceiling increase, Joe Biden wants to invest trillions into America's future by bolstering education subsidies, childcare, and more. And he claims that this will have tons of profound impacts like reducing carbon emissions, strengthening the middle class, helping us recover from COVID, etc., etc.
But the reality is Build Back Better isn't really going to support anyone, and that is very controversial to say, but we are unapologetically willing to discuss anything here at Politics Corner. But a majority of the proposals from Build Back Better, you know what? I feel like you can say this better than me. Just go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, I think we both agree. A majority of the proposals from Build Back Better are simply tax cuts and subsidies that won't make a significant impact to anybody, but will dreadfully tank our economy. And that, by the way, will eventually actually hurt the people that the bill is designed to support. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. It's about optics. This is Joe Biden staring down the path of re-election and needing a multi-trillion-dollar publicity stunt under his belt.
I mean, yes, you're right. And they're basically willing to do anything just at this point to say that Build Back Better has been passed. I mean, initially it was supposed to be a $5 trillion initiative over the course of 10 years. Now that's $3.5 trillion. Now it's $1.5 trillion. I mean, we've seen sporadic negotiations where Republicans are calling the bill out as an unnecessary tack on to what could be a very simple debt ceiling revision, pretty much just designed for optics. And then we've got Democrats who are adamant that this is the beginning of our nation's future and we have to invest in it.
Yeah, and well, now is probably a good time to bring up the hyperpolarization of our nation right now. Just as you just said, we have people on the two opposite sides of the coin, discussing the same thing. Like we said earlier, Congress is perfectly divided. The White House is Democrat right now. The Supreme Court has a Republican bench.
The power dynamics in D.C. are basically so tense that lightning strikes every time the word policy is mentioned in the center of this present-day dystopia. That's what it is. So, okay, the reason that negotiations have sort of been in this gridlock is because Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat, has been refusing to approve the bill, citing what a lot of Republicans have been saying, that it's unproductive and it's all about optics. And that has pretty much been the case since October. And now it's getting more and more concerning as we approach the December deadline to pass a new budget.
Within the last couple of days, though, negotiations were reinvigorated. Now, that's for a couple of different reasons, but I think that they can really be summed up as Joe Biden is concerned about re-election.
Right, and we'll talk about this in our next segment, but a lot of states that voted for Biden in the 2020 election had their off-year elections and seem to have turned red overnight. Now, that is concerning because that could mean that they will not support Biden in 2024, so Build Back Better really needs to get pushed through for him.
Also, Let's Go Brandon is contributing to Biden's increasing disapproval. If you don't know about the story, Brandon Brown, a NASCAR driver, won 16th place at the Xfinity Series on November 6th, and the audience is primarily Republicans, began chanting, F Joe Biden, which reporters covered up by saying, they're saying, let's go Brandon. So now there's this whole code phrase where if you say, let's go Brandon, you're expressing your disdain for the president right now.
Right. Bill Maher actually said something about this in a monologue, and I thought it was hilarious. But then I found out people are saying Bill Maher was red-pilled. And I had to look up this definition. What is red-pilled? It basically means to wake up one day and become a conservative. And I'm like, what? But they're saying he was red-pilled after this came out because he's a very staunch Democrat. And now he's sort of criticizing his own party. But you know what? Let's just have a listen.
Taking everybody down. They're already writing Biden's obituary. his political obituary. The real one they wrote years ago. Biden had another rough week, I got to say. First of all over the country now, conservatives think it's so funny to say, let's go Brandon. Have you followed this story? Yeah. There was a NASCAR race, and a driver named Brandon won the same day that the crowd was chanting Joe Biden. And the announcer, either dumb or wanting to cover this up, said, they're saying, let's go Brandon. Big code word for Biden, so that was bad. His disapproval rating, Joe's, was 36%. Not that far long ago. Now it's up to 53%. And Joe said, you think that's bad? You should hear about this Brandon guy.
Yeah, no, actually, that is pretty funny. But in all seriousness, Biden's shrinking popularity is the biggest reason why Democrats have been pushing so hard on Build Back Better. Now, as most of you know, Build Back Better has actually passed, which hopefully, we'll cover more in depth soon. But this really was, predictable, and it does not change how we feel about it.
Yeah, I do hope that we cover this more in depth soon, and it doesn't really change how we feel about it. Something interesting, though, the bill would have actually passed last night on the 18th, but GOP leader Kevin McCarthy filibustered for 8 hours on the Congress floor, which is basically when a congressperson gives a really long speech just to prevent the session from ending and therefore any decision that was made from going into effect. There have been a couple of historical examples. I think one was actually after the end of the Civil War. I forgot the details around it, but it had something to do with a really racist guy trying to prevent slavery from being abolished. But there have been a couple of filibusters in history, and they're pretty notable just because of how unique and, how shenanigan-y they are. But I think what's most, aside from all the shenanigans, what is most important to take away from all this is the reason most people voted for Biden is because they were sick of radical Trumpism. And now people are going to be sick of radical liberalism.
Very true. The United States has been on this wild political pendulum of divisiveness because we really don't have enough moderates in the government right now who will bring peace and reason and sense to these negotiations.
Which is a great reason to get involved. You, Americans, are the voters. You decide who to elect and why. So vote, not just in the presidential elections, but in the primaries, in the state elections, in the local elections. Until we see more people ask for moderates in government, we won't get them. You know who's politically involved right now? It's the far left and the far right. They don't represent you. They represent you in aggregate. But those aren't the people that you want. And until we start getting involved, we are going to be left with far left and far right factions duking it out at our expense.
Well said, indeed. Anyway, that's all we have for Build Back Better. We'll be right back to discuss critical race theory. See you soon.
Welcome back to our third and final segment for today's state and local news.
Today we are tackling the incredibly controversial critical race theory in schools. Now, this topic is so controversial that several spectators are considering it to be the biggest driving factor in Democrat losses across the country. Here is what political comedian Bill Maher had to say.
Strange week. There's a lot of good news, which I'm going to get to, but it came too late to help the Democrats from getting their kicked all over the country in off-year elections. The big issue was critical race theory being taught in the schools. We're going to talk about it on the panel. Now, I think Democrats should study critical race theory, which is the theory that it's critical to win races.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. So all this talk about critical race theory is causing a lot of people to ask, what is critical race theory and what's all the controversy about?
Well, critical race theory is a graduate-level curriculum that basically states that race is merely a social construction that all of history, law, and sociology can be analyzed through, with the lens that all institutions have a tendency to oppress people of color.
Now, CRT has been around since the 70s, but it was recently popularized after the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, with a lot of pushes to actually start incorporating it in as early as elementary school.
Yes, that's true. So there's actually been a lot of opposition surrounding critical race theory in schools, and personally, I understand where it's coming from. The basis of CRT is sort of rooted in making white students apologize for their privilege and making black students feel victimized by their peers. And the reason that that's ineffective at such a young age is kids will grow up with an inflated sense of burden due to their ancestry.
I know, that's a very controversial thing to say, but I agree. The problem with CRT is that you're introducing racism to not racist kids. And when you do that, you inadvertently make them racist.
It's true. It's taking advantage of a vulnerable population and misleadingly politicizing them for partisan benefit. So in other words, it's the pinnacle of leftism, which I know we are unbiased and moderate here, but I have never seen the right being so willing, the way that Democrats are, to politicize kids. In fact, a lot of conservative values has to do with keeping kids out of politics. But you may notice that I said partisan benefit right there. Well, how is divisiveness beneficial to anybody, you might ask? Well, why don't I let conservative influencer and host of The Candace Show, Candace Owens, explain.
Racial division and class warfare are central to the Democrat Party platform. They need blacks to hate whites, the rich to hate the poor, and soon enough it'll be the tall hating the short.
So I like that clip a lot, not because it's very lengthy or profound, actually. It's just the opposite. It's real. It's to the point, and it's a perfect description of what is happening right now with critical race theory.
Yeah, you totally have a point. Given the conservative opposition to CRT, a lot of liberals have been clawing and punching back to defend teaching it to students. If CRT was taught the way it's supposed to be taught, which is heavily discounted and just as an academic lens, I don't think we would have such an issue. The problem is when you go beyond that and tell students, hey, you are racist, America is racist, now grow up hating each other, which is what the proposed additions to the curriculum are going to actually do.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that America is so divided over CRT is because conservatives are shouting that white people are under attack and liberals are shouting that CRT is absolutely perfect, has no implications, and that any other opinion is plain as day propaganda. The reality is somewhere in the middle. It's not a polarized topic. We need to find a middle ground.
A lot of this pushback has come in the form of parents assembling in cities across the nation, attending PTA meetings, protests, and pulling their children out of schools to take a stand against CRT, and that was not met well on the media front.
That is very true. So first of all, we saw outlets like MSNBC and CNN calling out parents to not get involved in their children's learning because simply they are not trained educators. Now, I'm curious, Pallavi, how do you feel about that? Do you think that anyone should be allowed to get involved in local curriculum, in their kids' curriculum, or should it really just be teachers on those boards?
No, absolutely. I completely disagree that parents are not educators. I mean, a child's first learning, begins at home, and it's imperative that parents are involved in their children's education.
Right. I mean, the decision to incorporate evolution in schools, that was held back on a lot because a lot of parents had religious values. And that's a historical example, but I think that that's a good thing. I'm glad that it was held back. I'm glad that people had that discussion before eventually the culture adapted. It's not okay for a single political party to unanimously decide amongst themselves how children should be taught with absolutely no input from the parents of those kids.
Right. Not just no input, also, by discounting their opinion.
Right. I mean, it's not even just discounting their opinion. The Biden DOJ issued a memorandum labeling parents in opposition to CRT as domestic terrorists. Here is what Republican Senator Ted Cruz had to say to Deputy Kristen Clark about that.
The Department of Justice issued a memorandum to the FBI instructing them to mobilize against parents across the country, parents of school kids, who have the temerity to show up at school boards and express their opposition to the teaching of critical race theory. Do you believe parents objecting to the teaching of critical race theory have civil rights in the democratic process?
The First Amendment is a core value in our democracy. And
I didn't say free speech, I said civil rights. School board meetings are democratic. They are petitioning your local government. Do they have civil rights that the voting rights gives a damn about?
Yet they have the right to express their view, to challenge the school boards, to ask.
And is
for
it beneficial
reforms.
for the Attorney General to label them as domestic terrorists and direct the FBI to target them?
The Attorney General's memo deals with threats against public servants and says that threats against public servants are not only illegal, they run counter to our nation's core values.
Do you believe parents objecting at school boards are domestic terrorists?
I don't, Senator.
Do you believe Antifa are domestic terrorists?
I don't have a view about Antifa.
Do you believe the Black Lives Matter protesters who burned shops, who firebombed police cars, who murdered police officers, do you believe they're domestic terrorists?
Senator, I believe that we live in a society where people espouse different views, but what we don't want are threats.
Ms. Clark,
or
it is
violence.
amazing that you're not willing to condemn people who are murdering police officers and firebombing cities because your politics aligns with them. But at the same time, when it comes to parents at school boards, you're perfectly comfortable with calling a mom at a PTA meeting a domestic terrorist.
Yeah, no, that's just shocking, right? But even bringing this back to California now, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a legislation that is going to require all high school students to take a semester of ethnic studies starting in 2025. And the curriculum being developed right now is going to have a key component of critical race theory. The problem is you are probably not involved. This is not at the federal level. This is at a city and state level. You can go to PTA meetings and voice your opinion. You can decide which school your child goes to. You can decide who you vote for.
Yeah, the problem we're seeing is that too many people think that they can bury their heads in the sand and somehow politics won't affect them, but it will, I promise. If you don't get involved, you won't be represented.
Very well said. Indeed, there was a time where you could pretty much, sort of sail through without worrying too much about politics because we had moderates in power, but now more and more we need people who actually care about politics. So remember, you are eligible to pre-register for voting as soon as you are 16 years old. And being politically active is not a crime.
If you want to get involved in politics but don't know where to start or who to trust, then Politics Corner is great for you. We are a free podcast that gives you bite-sized crash courses in modern-day politics, how government affects you, and how you can get involved.
We pride ourselves on being unbiased and moderate with our show to make sure that you feel satisfied with who you vote for.
If you want to hear more for us, then follow us on social media or just subscribe.
Thank you. I'm Pallavi Sharma.
I'm Ishaan Prasad.
And thank you for listening to Politics Corner.